Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. It's noon. You're joining me in my backyard here. Just gonna really excited for everyone to participate in this. Hi, Jacqui. So today we are going to be doing a live conversation with Jacqui Blue, who is a filmmaker. And soon as she requests, there we go. We're just gonna go live with her. Hi,
Hey,
how are you?
good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I love your background.
Oh, thank you. I get this lovely painting here with all these beautiful blue flowers.
Oh my gosh, that's a painting? That's so cool.
Yeah, it was given by
Whoa.
my production partner's sister was getting rid of a bunch of stuff and said, "Hey, do you have space for this?" And I was like, "Yes."
Absolutely. That's
I love it. I
awesome.
love it's so like it's beautiful. And I wake up in the morning and I just like open my eyes and see these beautiful blue flowers across the room. I love it. It does something positive for the brain.
Yeah. I just ordered a book about like feng shuiing your apartment and how that will how that relates to like the actual like brain signals and stuff, which is
Yeah,
really quite exciting. So
it
thank
really
you
is.
so
It's
much
really
for yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. This is the first video that I'm doing with these live interviews, and I'm really excited to have you as the first person. Um, and these videos I sort of started, I said this to you in the email, but I sort of started these because after the success of the art show that we did in May, I just, so many people have used art and have used their organizations to dive deeper into their own mental health journeys. And I just really want to, bring some attention to those stories and bring light to them. So that's definitely what you have done. And so I'm really quite excited to chat with you more about, your journey and everything that you've been through. So if you want to just introduce yourself and sort of, say who you are and, what you make, and we can just start there.
Yeah. So I'm Jacqui Blue, filmmaker, hypnotherapist, and writer. And so I use film as my form of activism.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a teenager, I was involved with animal rescue and animal rights as an activist. And as I got older, filmmaking became a really good outlet for me to express how I felt about all of my thoughts about natural childbirth. And then, so that was my first documentary, was about natural childbirth, and it's
Hmm.
called Beautiful Births. And I didn't really make it personal about like my personal journey or anything. And the same thing with the suicide documentary. you know I just released the I Chose Life documentary in May during Mental Health Awareness Month. I
Mm-hmm.
wish I had known about your art show because I'm also an artist and painting. I don't think I've mentioned this a whole lot publicly, but when I was editing this documentary, every night after I would spend, 12 to 16 hours, however long I would spend editing, once I was done editing, I needed to cleanse the mental palette. I did not want to go to bed thinking about suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So I would paint. And it's really funny. Painting has become a form of art therapy for me, but
Yeah.
I never ever paint like dark stuff. It's always light, positive, happy. I paint a lot of seahorses. I really like seahorses, and I paint seahorses a lot. Um, and I just like, I like to paint as a way to just like, it's art therapy. It's
Yeah.
therapeutic. So, but yeah, when I was editing this documentary, I was actually doing a lot of painting as a form of art therapy in the evenings before going to bed, because I was like, I can't go to bed thinking about suicide. I'm not going to sleep.
Right. Yeah. Well, I would love for you to submit stuff again next year because
Yeah,
we
definitely.
will do it again next year. And I think that was just the underlying message throughout the whole month was how much people use art in whatever form in order to, truly express themselves. And I think that, what's so cool about our modern art movement is it isn't necessarily constrained by rules the way that I think that it used to be. You know, like there was specific impressionist rules, and then like someone would do something completely different and it would be, you know, like, oh, you know, really courageous to be, you know, doing something completely different. But instead now, like people can really just express their art and their true selves through art in a, you know, completely whatever way is true to them, which I think is just so special. So that's really cool
It
that you
really is.
did that.
Well, in the documentary itself, when I made this documentary addressing the suicide crisis, I really wanted to make it a full, well-rounded discussion. And in that, I talked about coping mechanisms, and art therapy is one of the coping mechanisms I mentioned, because I
Yeah.
know for me that has been huge. Not everybody's an artist, so that might not resonate with everybody. For someone who's more athletic, they might, you know, run or go to the gym or lift weights. But for somebody who's more artistic, I think art therapy is really powerful. Friends of mine who are musicians, and I envy them because I wish I could make music. Music has been a great source of medicine for me throughout my
Mm-hmm.
life, and just a great source of comfort in general.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of resonates. You can always hear a song or something that is going to relate to how you're feeling, no matter what mood it is, like the best
Right.
mood or the worst mood. There is a song that will resonate with how you feel. And I think, you know, music is a really powerful art form as well. And I have friends who are musicians, Tones, who's in my documentary. He mentions, you know, there are some people who make music and write poetry and you'll never hear it because it's for them. It's therapeutic. It's
Right.
cathartic. It's their form of art therapy. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not meant to be heard by other people. But when people do share that side of themselves, I think music is one of the most powerful forms of art therapy there is.
Agreed. Yeah. You know, one of the submissions for the month was actually from my friend Courtney, and she's 7 years in recovery, or in she's celebrating 7 years of sobriety last month, and she her song that she released during Mental Health Month is about, you know, like one of her like lowest points, and like struggling with a coke addiction. And so it's just, you know, it's really so powerful to be able to, you know, turn that into something, you know, years later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's what you and I had been a little touching on a little bit in the emails, is taking something traumatic and that has affected you in a deep negative way, and finding a light in that, and finding something positive in that, where you can turn it
Mm-hmm.
into something positive.
Right.
Where it might have, you know, I went through something really traumatic in my marriage, where the night that I said to my husband, you know, it had been tumultuous for 8 years off and on.
Yeah.
And I finally said to him, I want a divorce. And something in him snapped, and he almost killed me that night.
Mm.
And it's, you know, I turned that into, okay, what else am I going to do with the rest of my life? Like, I'm not going to die here tonight. In fact, that was what as I was lying in a pool of my own blood, I'm thinking, what am I going to do if I survive tonight?
Yeah.
And that was a Saturday night. By that Monday, I was enrolled in film school.
Good for you.
And, you know, so that was a big deal. Like, I'm not sitting here like, okay, woe is me. This horrible thing happened. Like, yes, this horrible thing did happen. And I had to go through therapy, and my children went through therapy. And, you know, we utilized the resources that were available to us at the time. And we were in South Florida. Women in Distress was a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thankful that there are resources like that. There needs to be more resources like that.
Yeah.
I love what Steven Tyler is doing with Janie's House, and for,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for women. But there needs to be more, because there's not enough. And sometimes relationships like the one that I was in can lead to homicide or suicide.
Right.
I was convinced throughout my marriage that the only way out was going to be, I have to kill myself or he's going to kill me. And I didn't think he would actually kill me until that night.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
so our relationship was not I want to mention this about domestic violence, because a lot of people, when you think of domestic violence, you think of the obvious, somebody with bruises, somebody who's being beat up physically. My relationship was not physically abusive ever.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
emotionally, mentally abusive. And everybody could see that except me.
Mm-hmm.
I was the one who kept making excuses and saying, no, he's depressed. No, you don't understand. He's just having a hard time. I had every excuse in the book for him, but he was not physically abusing me. And
Right.
because when I was a child, I had dealt with physical abuse from my dad and brother,
Mm-hmm.
in my mind, I connected abuse as physical.
Right.
And if somebody's emotionally abusing me, I thought, well, he's just depressed. He's just bipolar. He just needs a therapist. He just needs a pill. He'll be fine. He just needs to grow up and mature a little more. I had, like I said, every excuse in the book. So not all domestic violent relationships are physically abusive. And that's what I think is dangerous. I didn't ever think he would kill me or become violent, physically violent on me. I knew he was messed up. I knew he had issues. I didn't ever think he would physically hurt me.
Right.
And so he did.
Yeah. And I'd just like to say for anyone who's watching, if you are experiencing something like this, there's a lot of resources out there. On More Than You See, under our organization's page, we have links to, sexual domestic violence organizations that have helplines, 24-hour helplines if you need a call. So, there is help out there. And I'm just going to repeat that several times throughout this.
Yes, absolutely.
Throughout this live.
That's the thing. People don't realize that there is help, or they're ashamed to get it, or they're afraid. There's a huge fear factor involved with domestic relationships of, if I leave, is he going to kill me? Is he going to hunt me down? I can't leave because he'll kill me, because he'll hunt me down.
Right.
There is a fear factor involved in a lot of relationships. And I really love what Evan Rachel Wood has been doing as far as domestic violence and making legislation, like actually using her platform to make legislation happen and let voices be heard. It's so important because people don't talk about it. And when they do, their voices are silenced.
Right. Yeah. So, diving into your documentary, your second documentary, which was specifically about the suicide crisis in America, obviously this is, we can see that, like, how everything connects, but if you want to, give us an exact roadmap as far as why you decided to create this and all of that sort of stuff, that would be great.
Yeah. So I had dealt with my own personal, and I don't dive into this in the film because I didn't want to make the film about me and about my journey, because I knew so many other people are experiencing what I had experienced. I didn't need to share my personal stuff. I didn't need to make it about me. So I was a PA on a film. It was a romantic comedy. When I read the script, when I read the screenplay and was asked if I wanted to work on it as a PA, I was in tears by the end of reading the screenplay. And then they told me, oh no, it's not a drama, it's a romantic comedy. And I was like, what? Like, I read it as a drama. As I'm reading it, I'm reading it as a drama, and I'm like in tears. And they're like, no, the director is making it a romantic comedy, which I thought was a brilliant way to spin this story because, Do you
want to shout out what it was?
Oh, it's called The Last Train.
Okay.
It was written by Anthony Montez, and it's based on his own suicide attempt. And he took that and he turned, again, like we talked about, taking your tragedy and turning it into a form of art therapy. And he was able to do that with this. So I thought that was really powerful, and I really wanted to be a part of the making of this film. And Anthony and one of the producers of the film, Sierra, approached me and said, hey, Jacqui, we know you did a documentary about childbirth. Would you be interested in documenting the making of our film? And I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, that would be cool. And then I was talking to my stepdad one night, and my stepdad is a Vietnam veteran with PTSD, and he knows what I went through with my marriage. And I told him what I was up to, and I'm going to start working on this film as a PA, and they want me to document the making of it. And he was the one who sparked the idea of, well, why don't you just make a documentary about suicide? You have experience with this, the veteran population has experience with this, referring to, what he deals with PTSD. Right. So I really let that idea spin in my head. And then I started talking to people. I talked to mothers who lost their daughters, and I talked to sisters who lost their brothers. And the more I started talking to people who lost loved ones to suicide, I realized I need to do this. It became kind of like a spiritual soul calling, not like, oh, I want to do this. It was more like, I need to do this.
Yeah.
There's a need for this subject to be talked about. And because of my own personal experience, I guess, unfortunately, I'm extremely comfortable talking about suicide. And I realize not everybody is. And this is a conversation that needs to happen because it affects so many people, either directly or indirectly. If you personally don't know somebody who has been suicidal or who has died by suicide, somebody that you know does know someone who has been suicidal or died by suicide. And one of the most shocking things to me when I was making this film was, I knew what I had thought and felt growing up in my whole life. When I went public about the fact that I was making a film about suicide, people that I had known for years, decades even, messaged me privately, thanked me for doing this, and then confessed their own suicidal thoughts and feelings. And these were people that I never, ever would have imagined had even thought of suicide. And then it dawned on me how many people think about suicide and never say a word about it because there's a stigma, there's a taboo, they're ashamed, they're embarrassed. They don't want people to know that they've ever had this thought. And when I tell you that people have told me this, I mean, I'm not just saying a small number. It was a shockingly large number of people.
Well,
I was like, wow.
Yeah, I talked to my therapist about suicide this week in preparation, but also just to talk to her about it. And she said that she read a stat somewhere at some point when she was in school that it's something like, 90% of people have had suicidal thoughts at one time or another. And, of course, there is our will to live is extremely powerful. And that is, that's something I talk about on More Than You See a lot, is like who we are and our emotional reaction to things is very based on our brain chemistry. It's based on, our DNA, like what has been, rooted in us, like how we are built as people is something that is just innate in us. And one of the things is our desire to survive. And so, even though that there is such a huge stigma around it, most people have had suicidal thoughts. It's just that our will to live overpowers that and pushes us through and enables us to,
It's actually really easy as people think. Did we lose?
Yeah, I got a phone call.
Oh, okay. But yeah, like it's the thing I want to touch on what you were just talking about. It's actually really hard to kill yourself. And people don't realize this. A lot of people say it's the coward's way out. For every completed suicide, there's 25 attempts. And those attempts are failed suicides. Those are people who tried to kill themselves and failed. And it's because your body fights back, your brain fights back because there is that will to live. And, when I was 6 years old was the first time I thought about suicide. It was the first time I ever attempted suicide. I was at a school assembly in elementary school and they talked about drowning. We were in Florida. In Florida, drowning is like the #2 cause of death of children. So there was a whole assembly about drowning, and they were talking about how you can even drown in a cup of water. You could drink water wrong and drown in a cup of water. And I just remember thinking, wow, if it's so easy to drown, I'm going to go home and drown myself. And it was because of abuse. It's not because of in my case, in my specific case, it's not because of a chemical imbalance or mental disorder, but specific incidences that were happening. And so there was abuse, and it was a reaction to abuse and trauma. So I went home and I thought I'm going to drown myself and could not do it. It was,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember being like, well, if it's so easy to drown yourself, this should be easy. Nope. I mean, I'm obviously, obviously it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember thinking as a young child, if it's so easy, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Suicide is actually, it's not the coward's way out. I
No.
think people who actually end up going through with suicide, they have battled this within themselves back and forth over and over again and decided many times not to do it. And then
Mm-hmm.
something pushed them over the edge.
Yep.
Sometimes I think it can absolutely be impulsive. If somebody is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, it can be an impulsive, like Terry Kath,
Yeah.
from Chicago. That was a complete accident. That was an impulsive,
Premeditated. Mm-hmm.
right? Exactly. So sometimes you do have cases of that, but then you also have people who have been dealing with suicide ideation for a very long time, and something has held them back, or they've maybe made attempts and failed and get mad about it. I've heard stories of people getting really mad that their attempts failed. And that's
Right.
all, it all goes back to what you were saying about there is a will to live that overrides everything else in the brain.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd like to just, mention again more, like this is something that I talked to my therapist about this week is what do you do if a friend of yours thinks you're concerned about a friend? And, this is something that she said that I had sort of heard before, but I just wanted a licensed person to reiterate it, is that you ask. If you have a friend who you are concerned because they're saying something that is concerning, then you just ask. You ask if they have suicidal thoughts. You ask if they have a plan. And you direct them to other resources. And one in particular that's so important, I think, is the Trevor Project, specifically because it supports the queer community in particular. And that community, there's a much higher percentage of people who do have suicidal tendencies because of this abuse. Like, I think that one thing that she said that echoes what you just said is the fact that, she said that she learned about how if someone is able to go through with it, it means that nothing at that point could have stopped them, because they've gotten to a point where it's where that's their only answer, and they're able to override their body's innate desire to live. And of course that's that's horrible, and it's so devastating that people can get to that point. But I do think that it's important to just state that we can do everything that we can to support someone who's going through something like this, but it's not on us. It's not because I think one thing that people don't talk about is how much obviously this ripple affects everyone. So, I actually had a friend in high school who attempted to commit suicide, and I went and visited him in the hospital. And of course, now looking, I was rereading some journals from that time the other day, and I had no idea what was going on. Like, I really was, just really didn't grasp what had occurred. And now going back and reading what I had written about the whole experience, was it honestly just, it sort of blew my mind a little bit, just my own disconnect from what was happening, the way that he was reacting to things, visiting him in the hospital, how much that affected me as a person. Like, there's all of this ripple effect that occurs. And I think that again just reiterates the fact that suicide affects all of us, and it is not something that should be stigmatized. Like, this is something, that a conversation that we should be having, because it is really important. So thank you for making this documentary about it. And you had Jared Padalecki, is that how you say his name? Jared
Padalecki. Yep.
Padalecki. So how did he become involved in this film?
So when I was, again, this goes back to the Last Train.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a PA on The Last Train, the director of The Last Train was this brilliant woman named Tracy Pellegrino. I really enjoyed watching. I loved this feature film that I was working on as a PA in LA was directed. I thought that was fantastic. And I sat back and just admired watching her work.
Yeah.
And she was the one who decided to take this drama and turn it into a romantic comedy, which I thought was brilliant because, you know, you already have the tragedy and the trauma in the story. So to find a light in it and to find something that you can make lighthearted and make more relatable, because people relate more to romantic comedies, you know, and to find the human connection in that story. And that's really what it's about. And that's what makes it that romantic comedy, is finding that human connection between these two people who are dealing with their own traumas. So Tracy was married to one of the actors on Supernatural. Her husband played Lucifer. And my co-producer was researching celebrities who, my first film had no celebrities in it, and that was, everyone told me, oh, that's a big no-no, you can't make a film and not have celebrities in it, you have to have at least one celebrity in it. So I was like, okay. So for the second film, I was like, well, we got to research people who have been affected by suicide. And Jared Padalecki had launched his Always Keep Fighting campaign, which was an anti-suicide campaign, in March. And we had started filming interviews for this in March with Anthony and Sierra, who were in The Last Train. So it was like the month that we went into production, this actor who we had a sort of small connection to through Tracy's husband through The Last Train launched. So I went to Tracy and I asked her, I said, hey, we're making a documentary which is going to dovetail this film that you're directing. And one of the actors on your husband's show, and I don't watch Supernatural, so I didn't know. I didn't know anything about these actors or who they were, or anything about their passions or anything. I didn't know anything. And I said, I think, she says, well, do you know which one it is? I said, I think he plays Sam. I mean, I was that disconnected, like I didn't know. I couldn't pronounce his last name either. And she was like, well, okay, can you send me proof that he actually did this, that he's actually passionate about this? So I said, sure. And I sent her what my co-producer had sent me. And that was in March. And I heard back from her in November. Apparently Jared lives in Texas and the show shoots in Canada. So they're very rarely in Los Angeles where I am. So she said she got a hold of one of the producers, one of the associate producers, and she said, hey, Jared is in town. He would like to be a part of your project. You have like 24 to 48 hours to make it happen, because he's like, they're in town for such a short time. So here's your window, here's the information. And we were able to make it happen within that short time. He was very generous of his time. He sat and talked with us for about an hour. Made time for us between meeting the writers, I guess they had got new writers at the WB. So between meeting the new writers and going to LAX, he made time to fit in an interview with us. And he was really kind, really passionate. He had a lot to say about the subject, very, very, very open about this topic, which I thought was great, because not a lot of people in his position are willing to speak about their own mental health struggles.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly why, you know, I created this platform is to really, you know, give people a voice and allow people of any level to share their story, because I think that that's just so important. Because, you know, so something I shared with you in the email is, you know, obviously the fact that like I created More Than You See because of my own, you know, depression. And I created it after listening to a podcast with Zachary Levi, and listening to him talk about his like suicidal thoughts and his own mental health struggles. And he's someone who I love the nerd community, and so I'm really very passionate about that. And so to hear someone of his caliber, it was very important for me to hear his story, and for me to be able to relate to that. So that makes sense, and I think that's really great that you were able to get him, be part of your film. Like, that's really wonderful. And how, I know you said that it just released in May, but how has the response been to it?
The response so far, so because I'm independent and don't have a lot of mainstream traction yet, I keep, I'm not giving up on that yet. I'm going to keep, because I feel like this is so important that, eventually somebody in the mainstream media is going to see my film and say, hey, this really is important. But the feedback so far has been really overwhelmingly positive. And sometimes I get these emails from strangers that bring me to tears. The word that I hear a lot is powerful. Powerful is a word that people say a lot. I think that's probably the word I hear the most. I've heard that this is a important tool and resource with entertainment value instead of just a film. So the feedback has been really validating to me, because there were times when I was making this film where I thought, does anyone even care? People in the mental health community, some of the big, I won't name names, but some of the big nonprofit groups that you have heard of, shunned me and said, no, do not touch this subject. And instead of being supportive on any level, were the exact opposite, which also shocked me in a very negative way. But I thought, you know what, like, I had no money to make this film. I had no support, big Hollywood. I had no support from the mental health community. And I pushed through and did it anyway, and said, you know what, this is so important. The people that are reaching out to me, the people I am talking to, one of the organizers of a group called Solos, Survivors of Love, she was very welcoming to me. Renee Green, who she's married to a psychologist, she reached out, told me her brother's story. She has been very supportive. The fact that her and her husband both work in the mental health community and have been nothing but supportive. And then when they watch my film, she talks about how, I touched on all the things, the terminology and all the things that people within the mental health and suicide community want you to be aware of. So now I hope that the same people that shunned me in the beginning, that were against me even touching this topic, I understand it's a sensitive topic. They probably didn't know where I was going to go with it, or was I going to exploit it and, make a mockery of it. And if that's their thought, I can understand. But I hope that those people will now watch my film and see what I actually did with it. And like you mentioned, the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project and also the Transgender Lifeline are two numbers that I leave as resources at the end of this film, because I've heard from so many people that have called the National Suicide Crisis Hotline that were of the LGBTQ community, who were laughed at, made fun of, not taken seriously, or told, well, hey, you're gay, you're going to hell anyway, so it doesn't matter if you kill yourself. And then these people actually attempted suicide. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that same story, because it's been so many. But it disturbed me so much that I felt like I did reach out to the Trevor Project. Nobody from their community wanted to talk to me about the film, but I put their number in the resources anyway, because the LGBT community needs a resource. They need to know that they're not alone. They need to have coping mechanisms available to them, and not be told you're going to hell for your lifestyle.
Right.
That's not okay. That's not okay. It's
right.
Even if I'm not a Christian, but even if you are, isn't it not your place to judge? Isn't it God's place to judge? So, I feel like it's so horrible to say that to somebody.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk for hours on just the bigotry and closed-mindedness of, people in the country, and how damaging that is. But we won't go there. But that's really,
but that does lead to more suicides.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
100%. Yeah. No.
I
Yeah.
wish
You're
people would just be more more
right.
mindful of the
But
way we treat each other. That's
for sure, for sure. And I think, having conversations like you have in your film, and having conversations like this, and I think that it is, suicide is a difficult subject matter, because I think that there is this belief that if you bring up suicide to someone who's having suicidal thoughts, that means that that's going to convince them to do it. And that's just not right. Like, I mean, that's just not correct. That's not correct, in any sense, because if you are having an open conversation with someone, um, they actually would probably actually feel like you are being supportive and loving in a positive way, and are listening to them and are saying like, hey, I hear you, I understand you, like, please, talk to me. And I think that's something that just goes for the mental health community in general, is the importance of being vulnerable, of sharing. And I think that one thing that people sort of think is that they need to open up their whole story and just like, just say everything. And that's not the case. I think that it's important to say that, even if someone asks you, are you feeling depressed today, or something like that, and you don't want to go into it, that's totally fine. Just, just saying, thank you for your concern. I am feeling pretty depressed today, but I'm going to be okay. I'll let you know if I want to talk further, and just leave it at that. And I think that's it's important to have conversations like that, because then it just brings to light the fact that we all feel this. We all, have these periods of depression, and that's okay. That's exactly, what, this community and other communities are about, is just, just taking off the mask on everything and just saying like, we all have these feelings and it's okay. So thank you again for having these conversations. Jumping into quarantine and the fact that that this is so isolating for so many people, I'm wondering how that is, if you have seen how that has affected people, if you've had conversations with anyone, and what you're doing personally to just get through the days and work through things.
yeah. So in fact, because quarantine happened right before I released the documentary, I knew at the end of last year we were going to release the documentary in the spring of 2020. I had no idea what was headed for 2020. I don't think any of us did.
Right.
And so in March, in mid-March in Los Angeles, we went on lockdown. And towards the middle of April, I realized, okay, like in the beginning, it was like, okay, we're going to be home for a few weeks, not a big deal. And then we really realized, oh, wait, this is actually a big deal. And people are losing their jobs and people are losing their businesses. And then you have children that are stuck home with toxic and or abusive family members. And you have partners who are now stuck with their abusive partners who no longer have an escape of where maybe they used to go to the bar, or used to go bowling, or used to go to a ladies' night, or used to go whatever their outlet used to be. They no longer have that.
Right.
And you have cabin fever setting in. You have frustrations. Parents are not used to, for me, it's different. I'm used to being home with my children. I work from home and we've been homeschooling like forever. So for us, it hasn't been a huge change. But I started seeing on my social media feeds, because of course now everybody's on social media a lot more. And I started, in the beginning, it was everyone's okay, and okay, a few weeks, blah, blah, blah. But now it's no, it's going to be a few months, and we don't know how long it's going to be. And we don't know when or if things are going to go back to what we considered normal, or if this is a new normal. So there's a lot of uncertainty with people in, and my concern has been suicide and domestic violence going up the whole time, because you have cabin fever, because now people are losing their health insurance, where when they're losing their jobs, they're losing their health insurance. Whereas before, their health insurance might have covered their mental health medication. Now they don't have a job, they don't have health insurance. People can't access their mental health medication that for some people they rely on. That's part of their coping mechanism and how they get through every day. And now you have people who have never dealt with mental illness, who are now losing their jobs, their businesses. Somebody who after high school went and got a trade and started a company, and for the last 15, 20 years has been building now their salon or their restaurant or whatever their business is closed and permanently. And these are people that I'm more concerned being at risk for suicide than somebody who has dealt with suicide ideation and bipolar disorder for the last 20 years. Because people who have been dealing with suicide ideation and mental health, mental illness, they're used to dealing with this. Whereas people who are just now losing everything, they don't have coping mechanisms. They don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And when you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel is when, and there are a lot of people right now in our country who are in an abusive situation, even children. And for me, I know as a 6-year-old, why would a 6-year-old consider suicide? Because of abuse and because they don't see a way out. So when people don't see a way out of a toxic or abusive situation is when I think we need to be more concerned about suicide. And this is where people need more coping mechanisms. But if you're in an abusive situation where you are the punching bag every day, what is your coping mechanism?
Right. Yeah. And when you talked to people in your documentary, was there, did you go into resources or into tools or practices that people use?
My website. Yes. On the website, I have a list of resources that I wanted people to be able to reach out to, whether it's abuse, veterans, LGBT, or suicide loss and bereavement. So on my website, there's a list of resources. But in the film, I absolutely talked about what can we do about it. I talked about preventative measures. If you see friends and here's warning signs and here's risk factors, and just because somebody has risk factors and just because you're seeing warning signs doesn't necessarily mean that person is going to act on suicidal thoughts. But like you said, it is so important to ask and to have that conversation. And it's really important for us to understand that we need to have these uncomfortable conversations, because I would rather have an uncomfortable conversation with somebody I care about, with my best friend or with my child or my sister, than to bury them.
And can you specify what warning signs are so people can be aware of what those signs are?
Well, so I want to stress this. I will absolutely, there are definite warning signs. There are also some people who are not going to give off warning signs. And a lot of times when somebody does not give off warning signs, it is because they have already made up their mind and they don't want you to know and they don't want you to stop them. Oftentimes it's because they don't want to be talked out of it. They don't want to be stopped. They don't want anyone to lock them away. So their life, if somebody knows they're going to end their life and they don't want to be talked out of it, they don't want to be stopped, you might notice that somebody has gone from being down and depressed to all of a sudden they're acting happy. But they're also, while they're acting happy, they're also, hey, you know, I don't need this. Would you like it? Hey, I don't need this guitar I used to play for the last 15 years anymore because I got this new one. Do you want it? So you might notice that their disposition has changed, more positive, but maybe they're also, pay attention to what they're saying, not necessarily how they're saying it. But sometimes it's the opposite, and you want to pay attention to not what they're saying, but how they're saying it. So it depends. And so you want to look for, when you know a person and you know what their baseline is, look for changes in their baseline behavior. Changes in a person, you know, for somebody who's more introverted, it might be natural and normal for them to not pick up the phone and not reach out because that's their personality. They're just, you know, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong. It just means that's just who they are. They're not a phone person. that doesn't mean that they're depressed. In fact, I think my introvert friends are having a much easier time with the lockdown than my extrovert friends are.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, once you know a person's baseline behaviors, changes in that baseline behavior are definitely a flag for concern.
Mm-hmm.
But when people start talking about suicide more, or they start talking about, well, being a burden, when people start talking about being a burden, that's when you want to start, you know, paying attention a little more to their activities, what they're doing. But I also talk about preventative measures. And, you know, when you see somebody displaying any warning signs, if they're talking about suicide or they're acting out of character, if they're withdrawing more, then you want to step up and, you know, maybe we can't go out to lunch with a friend right now, but maybe you can get on a Zoom or get on a video chat. And like one of my best, and when I know going a certain way, I text her, respond on Facebook. But when I send her a text, I'll get a response from her. So, and it's just like a little thing like, hey, I love you. Hey, are you okay? Hey, I wish I could hug you. Because we're across the country. But little things like that, you know, pay attention. I pay attention to what people are posting, and I pay attention to when their baseline personality starts to change.
Yeah. I think what resonates for me is knowing your friends, you know, being like, even though we are all isolated in this time, it's still important to check in with people. It's still important to you know, to understand someone as much as you can, and so you can be able to see that fluctuation in their, you know, personality, or see those warning signs. So thank you for sharing that. I know that we've got a few more minutes before Instagram kicks us out, because they've got this 1 hour limit. So is there anything else that you really want to discuss, either with mental health, your own journey, or the film, anything you want to bring to light?
I think that the film is really important. I really wanted to cover, and it's been very validating hearing the feedback from people, because, you know, there was a lot of times during this film that it almost didn't get made. I almost gave up on this film so many times. And every time I almost quit, it was like the universe was like, no, you have to do this. It was like every time I was like, well, there's no money behind it, so I'm not going to be able to afford any music. A composer, Bruce Whitkin, stepped up and was like, hey, I want to get into scoring more films, and I like the cause that you're doing, so I would love to score your film for you. You know, towards the end, I had no B-roll, and I'm like, how am I ever going to put this together if I have no B-roll? And was able to borrow some money from my grandmother and my mother to get some B-roll, but then I still had a bunch missing. And one of my lifelong friends, who's an artist, Lisa Pers, stepped up and said, hey, I want to help out with your film because I believe in your cause. And so it would be like little things like that. Or I was depressed because I wasn't getting any support from the mental health community, and was shocked and was like, why wouldn't they support this project? And then, you know, Jennifer from Solos stepped up and said, hey, I want to help your project, and I want to put you in touch with people, and I want to share my story of my mom. And, you know, so it would be every single time something would happen to make me feel down and like, oh, this project isn't worth it, or I'm not going to finish it, or I don't have the funding to finish it. Something would always drop into my lap from the universe saying, nope, you're doing this.
Right.
And so, you know, I want people, other filmmakers who might be watching this, to know, even regardless of what your subject matter is, you might not have the funding and you might not have the support behind you, but if you have the passion and the motivation, do it anyway. Because there was a time I was thinking, you know, this film is not going to get done. It's not worth it. Nobody even cares. I was thinking nobody in Hollywood cares aside from Jared Padalecki, and nobody in the mental health community cares. In fact, they're encouraging me not to do it. Right. So I, you know, almost gave up, and I am so glad I didn't, because of the response and because of the feedback I'm getting from people. That is the one thing that is making me feel like, you know what, it was worth it. It was 5 years. It drained a lot of my energy. I spent a lot of those 5 years in tears as I'm listening to people's personal stories. But it was worth every second of it because of the feedback I'm hearing from people, and strangers who are thanking me for making this, and people telling me they didn't have resources and they didn't know what coping mechanisms were, and now they feel like they can have some hope because now they're going to explore certain things that they didn't know were available to them before. So these things are very validating to me, and when I hear that from people, it's very it makes me thankful that the universe did not let me give up on this project.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thankful for people like you reaching out to me and saying, hey, I want to talk to you about this film. And so thank you. And thank you for creating this platform. It's really important for people to talk about their stories.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I echo everything that you said, and I think that it's such a shame that you know had such resistance from organizations. Unfortunately, I think that it makes sense because as we talked about before, there is such a stigma around talking about suicide, and that's completely counterproductive. It goes completely against what we need to do. Because the more that we talk about it, the more that we can, share these warning signs, we can be aware of our friends, we can, give people support. And, again, I just want to say that, like, both on your website as well as on More Than You See, there's links to organizations like the Trevor Project, which is really incredible. And then what was the other hotline that you said for transgender?
The Trans Lifeline.
Yeah,
the Trans Lifeline and Trevor Project are two that I felt was absolutely so important for people to have access to, because, I don't want those people to call a hotline and be told by some well-meaning Christian. I'm sure these people mean well. They genuinely, believe what they believe, and, no judgment on my end, but I don't believe it's okay for anybody to tell anyone you're going to hell, so it doesn't matter. When people are already at their lowest, don't make them feel worse.
Right. Well, yeah. And in any sense, it's like, that's never okay.
No, it's never okay.
Yeah.
And I will never support anybody kicking anyone when they're down.
Right. Yeah, no, but thank you for having the conversation with me. I think that, like I said, your documentary is so important in, sharing people's stories. I think the other thing is the importance of sharing stories of people who've gone through suicidal thoughts and have come out through the other end, like we both talked about, how this is something everyone probably has experienced at one time or another, just like depression and, just like other forms of mental illness. And I think that it's so important for us to continue to have conversations around this, because, obviously mental health is so incredibly important. And it's only by having these conversations and destigmatizing these things that we can, come together stronger as a community and support each other. So, yeah.
100%. Thank you so much. And I hope we stay connected too.
Yeah, thank you. And I would love to share a trailer of your film on More Than You See. So I'll definitely get that from you and put it up. And if anyone is watching this and they want to learn more about Jacqui, the last 3 days, our posts have all been about Jacqui and her work. So go ahead and dive into that there. And Jacqui, do you want to say, if people want to connect with you about the film or buy your film or, rent it or learn more about you, how can they do that?
You can find the film at www.ichoselifefilm.com. And you can learn more about me and my work at www.jacquiblue.net. And it's spelled Jacqui.
Awesome. And obviously, I will tag Jacqui so you guys can follow her on Instagram. And again, thank you so much, Jacqui. And thank you everyone for watching and joining us today. And I hope to have a conversation again with you sometime soon.
Yes, I hope so too. I really enjoyed chatting with you, and I hope we stay connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
You too. Bye. Happy Friday.
Yeah, happy Friday.